didn't.
Yeah,
he wrote his on a manual typewriter and knew nothing about computers. He just made it all up, and computers followed him, not vice versa. So, but I have a question. Since you were supposed to be so cutting edge, and since George was writing his, George has proved that he was cutting edge, I think, with his meat episode. But did either of you ever, did the show ever come up with anything like, say, John and Kate +8, or the Octomom, or the Michael Jackson following his corpse by helicopter to the hospital?
Actually,
one of the challenges in doing the show, I mean, this is it's a technical thing. We had, one of the rules, aside from no daylight if possible, was every scene had to have some other screen in it. So even in the network boardroom, the network feed was running on network 23. In the newsroom, things were going on. Wherever you went, storefronts, the television, other people's offices, television was always on. And so we had to, the show had a great look because instead of doing that horrible thing where you're trying to, in the old days, you would shoot things at a certain frame rate, but the TV playing within it would have this little line that would go up because of the difference between 24 frames a second and 30 frames a second. We decided to shoot the whole thing on film, with the film speeding at 30 frames a second. So we were actually getting, the density of the picture was actually so much better because there was another, like 1/5 as, 20% more information actually going to your eye. But we had to have all these screens filled with stuff, and there was no way to produce all this stuff. So what they were doing was buying Japanese game shows and Iranian soap operas and things like that, and just getting this footage, and some department was charged with making sure they were all playing at different times, making up little logos and channel numbers to put in there. And then one of the fun things writing on the show was to be able to create the show that you would hear underneath, or you would go to it. And they were all things like, Family of Mutants. I did a whole episode called Deities, which was about gods in boxes. You go to your family vault, and there would be the interactive version of your loved one that you could tell them your stories and what you've been doing with Uncle Kate and the kids, whatever. So we did do that kind of thing, and they were nobody mentioned Michael Jackson, but it was the same kind of stuff that we were talking about all the time. Again, to great incomprehension by the audience.
Worth noting that in terms of computers, that Max himself was not actually a computer simulation. You guys realize that, don't you? He was not. It was Max. Yeah, it was Max Brewer in makeup acting.
Yeah.
So.
This Max Headroom had a very dark edge. It had a satirical edge, but it was also episodic network television. With the necessity of producing 1 hour of dramatic action per week and satirizing it at the same time, while satirizing the culture at large. That's just a very difficult technically to pull off. And I was just wondering if you have any comments on that.
It was incredibly difficult to pull off. The joke was that we were producing Blade Runner every 7 days. We had to do an hour. The production meetings, because again, remember, Peter Wagg had this vision. It was aesthetics, it was lighting, it was the car. Everything had to have a certain look. This is the reason there hasn't been a lot of futuristic science fiction on television. I mean, aside from the fact that networks don't often understand it, but it's just the sheer difficulty of having the weeks of conceptual arguments first. So what does a toaster look like in the future? How does it work? And then having to actually build it and make it work or make it pass. Everything was just far, far more complicated than you would ever really want it to be. And then you had to actually write around it and write to make it work and shoot at night. And the cameras had to be running at a special speed, and you didn't just go buy those from Technicolor. They had to be specially modified. And then you had to have this whole video crew feeding 20 different screens into every shot. It was, when they pulled the plug on us, I remember on a Tuesday, we all almost wept with relief. We were spending so much money. Lorimar, the studio, had put the son of the head of Lorimar, the studio, on the show as, they called him the supervising producer. He was just there to just kind of find out where the money was going. It wasn't a question of stopping it. You couldn't stop it by then. It was all going somewhere. But it was just a very, very challenging series to even consider doing in those days. But even now, it'd be difficult.
Well, it occurred to me that Max Headroom does not appear a lot in Max Headroom. He's the title character, but he's on a screen. He comments on the action, and he's obviously having a lot of fun commenting on the action. But he doesn't seem to be central to the action. Did you find this? Was it just a problem writing for Max?
No, because Max had his own writers. So, wow. Yeah. Oh, is that a secret? No. Well, you would sketch, you would write your own Max moments into the script. And part of it was also just practical. Edison Carter, Matt Brewer, the star of the show, was on set. So, and to do Max, it required, I think, something on the order of 4 hours of makeup. Then you had to actually do a couple of hours of him, being Max to the camera. So in essence, it was almost a whole other day of his schedule to do it. So there were practical limits on how much he could actually be in the show. Even if you wanted to write the entire Max Headroom episode, Max on screen, half of it, you wouldn't have been able to produce it on the schedule. In fact, a lot of it was he was doing that on Friday night or even on Saturday to do that Max stuff. So it was difficult. But there were also two English writers who were primarily comedy writers who were in, and their job was to tweak, improve, perhaps de-improve some of the Max lines, and then just give him little bits, little monologues and things that he could do, and sometimes we just randomly put them in. So it was another thing that made it far more complicated than you really wanted to be.
Okay, perhaps we should enlarge the world of Max Headroom into the vast culture of science fiction, because science fiction is, or attempts to be predictive in its own way. It seems to be that Max did a pretty good job. Aside from some misses, like believing that 20 minutes in the future we're still going to be using 5 1/4-inch floppy disks, I think that was a little failure of vision there. Especially as they had the digital money, which sort of sent them in a different direction. So, where do you think Max went right? Where do you think Max went wrong? Bob?
Yeah.
There we go. Oh, yeah. Yes.
I don't know. I never thought of Max Headroom as being a reality show because I'm very cynical about current reality shows. I think they're all scripted. And it seems to me like they are becoming more and more scripted. On the other hand, there is an analog of Max Headroom, I think, that's showing up again on the internet. Blogging. It's an amazing thing. Here you have Twitter, where you're having interaction with hundreds, thousands, or even millions of people if you can be Ashton Kutcher. And who wouldn't want to be Ashton Kutcher? Some of the things that Max Headroom seemed to have hit fairly well that didn't quite catch on. British had a newsfeed with a completely created character called Anna Nova. And somehow that never really made it, I think, because it was a little too artificial. But then again, look at Max Headroom. It's one of those things where I think we want more reality than Max Headroom was willing to provide, at least as far as the TV goes. But looking at the internet with the news feeds, with the stuff that's coming out, YouTube is an amazing interactive thing that didn't show up in Max Headroom. The Channel 23 people were doing it themselves as opposed to everyone out there on the street doing it. One thing I wanted to comment on was first time I think I had ever heard the term Luddite on television. And, yeah, and that probably is the single thing that Max Headroom hit right